Hello everybody, today is Monday, February 3rd, 2025, and just this past weekend, President Donald J. Trump has decided to impose tariffs on all items and imports coming in from Mexico, from Canada, and from China. Now, the president has imposed a tariff on imports coming from Canada, from Mexico, and from China in different and various ways. Specifically, all imports coming from Mexico are going to be subject to this 25% tariff. Most imports from Canada are also going to be subject to this 25% tariff. On top of that, with respect to China, there's going to be a 10% tariff on various imports. Now, what are the implications of this? Certainly, there are economic implications of this, there's political implications of this, and of course, there's legal implications of this. So why don't we dive into all of those very briefly? Number one, with respect to economic issues that may arise, of course, the benefit of a tariff for the United States is in the short term, you are going to see certain production entities, certain businesses, they're going to receive a benefit. The benefit's going to be that they're going to have less direct competition. So that's going to lead to an increase in prices, which will make more consumers in the United States purchase from them. So what you're going to see is those companies doing very well. On the detrimental side and on the other side of the coin, you're going to see rising prices for most consumers. That's going to hurt because there's less competition. And since there's less of an ability for competition with respect to price, you're now going to see prices begin to incrementally rise because those various competitors that were allowed to compete are now going to be squeezed out financially out of the United States ecosystem because of the fact that tariffs, of course, make it more expensive for an importer to import their items into the United States. So in the short term, overall, most consumers are going to see an increase in price, whereas for those entities that are getting the benefits of the tariffs, they might actually wind up doing better. What else are we going to see? Well, let's not forget that there's a very strong political motive behind what's taking place. From a political perspective, right now, Donald Trump is insisting that the reason that these tariffs are necessary is to curb illegal immigration, to curb trafficking, and he's also very focused on the issue of fentanyl and drugs entering the United States. Now, this ties into the whole justification or the rationale he's trying to use to be able to implement these tariffs in the first place. So, the president is relying on the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This act affords the president an opportunity when there's an issue of national emergency to be able to impose certain restrictions for the better and safetyment of the U.S. government and the people of the U.S. So, for example, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act was used after 9/11 to freeze assets held by terrorist groups. President Trump in his first administration also used this statute to sanction Venezuela and Iran. However, this statute has never been utilized in the history of the country for the purpose of imposing tariffs on foreign nations. So, from a political perspective, we now have this novel issue as to whether or not you can impose tariffs and as to whether or not these issues that he's focused on would be considered a true threat to national security. Then there's the legal implications. Now, from a constitutional perspective, the fact that President Trump is now focused on utilizing this statute from 1977 raises a whole new issuance of implications. So, if there's an individual or a business in this country or a union in this country that are being wronged because of this tariff, that feel that it's unconstitutional and they're being harmed, they would be considered to have standing to try and block or get an injunction, which is the same thing, to stop the issuance and enforcement of the tariff. So, the people of the United States have the potential opportunity to go to court and challenge the legality of this use of the statute. Number two, you're also going to have the opportunity for Congress to pass new legislation. Congress can pass legislation to either limit the enforcement of this 1977 act or to create parameters that would not allow a president to issue tariffs and impositions on imports via this statute, or it could pass other legislation altogether that could even repeal this statute. So there's many ways for the Congress to focus on passing new laws that may or may not either expand President Trump's ability to impose tariffs, restrict it, or eradicate what he's doing and set up a new precedent. We just went over the fact that the courts now can certainly limit the scope of what this statute authorizes a president to do. We discussed how the Congress, as lawmakers, not law interpreters, that's the courts, can potentially impact this law. And then we have this really interesting reality concerning international implications. And so the USCMA is what replaced NAFTA. That's the agreement. The USCMA is the agreement between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. There's a provision in that agreement in Article 31 that actually calls for dispute resolution mechanisms and what the parties can do in a situation when they feel that there's wrongdoing. Because essentially, the whole idea of having these agreements with Mexico and Canada is to have free trade between the countries. Now, realistically speaking, we know that President Trudeau and Mexico and the United States, they're all involved in ongoing dialogues and conversations to try and remedy this issue. President Trump, of course, is trying to hang his hat on the fact that we rely much less on imports than do Mexico or Canada, and he's hoping that this will encourage them to make changes in their laws and policies that will improve the overall position of the United States and, as he would argue, multiple countries at the same time. Notwithstanding that, in this current situation, if the countries wanted to force some sort of dispute resolution mechanism, just like a private settlement agreement, they have the opportunity to do so. They could also go to the World Trade Organization, which is an international trade dispute resolution organization where countries can bring claims and can discuss various treaties, statutes that have been entered into, and see if they can get a third-party interpretation or a decision that otherwise would tell the parties what they need to do. Realistically, though, just like at the founding of this country, when courts issued opinions, if there was nobody to enforce those opinions, they sort of were rendered meaningless. And in a scenario like this, going through the USCMA or going to the WTO, even if there was a decision that would challenge the enforceability of these tariffs, at the end of the day, the United States is still the United States, and unless every country involved agrees to actually align with the outcome of a decision, nothing's really going to happen. So we're going to keep monitoring what takes place with these tariffs. I can tell you it's going to be a long road ahead if anybody does seek to obtain an injunction, or if the Congress seeks to pass through or push through legislation that would limit or potentially even expand the scope of Donald J. Trump's powers. One thing is for certain, this is certainly a new means by which a sitting president is attempting to use the 1977 statute.